What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Steadfast. I'm your host, Sammie Carroll, Education Coordinator at Life Choices Women's Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, and I have been wanting to make an episode about gender and identity for a while. And then Target hit the news this week, and I had we're doing this episode, like ASAP. So I got the privilege of having Jason Evert back on the show today to talk about this topic. If you have been avoiding social media and the news, or maybe you're listening to this episode in a couple months or in a couple years down the line, Target has just released their June Pride Month merchandise, and they have leveled up on their displays and variety of merch. There's been a lot of debate, and now there's a boycott movement. Actually, Target already lost $9 billion within 1 week after their Pride merchandise release. There's been a lot of debate, and there's a boycott for two reasons. One, they have made a lot of this merch geared towards kids. We've got books, cards, calendars, onesies, etc. But the biggest controversy was the swimwear. They have released swimwear that tucks in genitals, and there was some debate online especially about how no, these swimsuits are actually for adults, not for children. But in the ads is pictures of teenagers. And I did have a friend send me a video of a mom going into the kids section holding up a kid's swimsuit. And even though it doesn't say anything about tucking in genitals, it does say gender affirming, unisex, etc. The second reason why people are upset is the Satan part of this. Target partnered up with Eric Carnell, who is an artist and a self-proclaimed Satanist. You can go to his shop and his Instagram, and you can see his art that says Satan respects your pronouns. He depicts Satan in his art, and people are upset about this, that Target has partnered with him. To address this at the end of the conversation, but let me tell you what we did here. I wrote down a ton of arguments that I received on social media or just arguments that I've heard over the years, and I just kept throwing them to Jason, and he responds to them in a loving and very informative way. Jason just released a book called Male, Female, Other, and the format of his book is very similar. He presents the arguments in support of the transgender movement and/or gender theory, and then addresses them. So this episode is for my friends that have sent me comments, questions, arguments, and this episode is also for people who want to be informed and how to address these arguments in a loving way. I felt like I could probably try to do it myself because I have given presentations about gender, but I just, at the end of the day, didn't feel qualified enough, and that's why we brought in Jason, because he is super qualified. At the end of the day, we all want to love and to be loved, and I hope and pray that you can see that underlying theme in our conversation. Before we jump in, I just want to remind you of our partners, 7 Weeks Coffee. Named thusly because at 7 weeks, a baby is the size of a coffee bean. They donate 10% of every purchase of coffee to a pregnancy resource center. And if you want your 10% to go to our education program here at Life Choices, use our link in the show notes. And if you want 10% off your purchase, use our discount code STEADFAST. Cool. My kid is yelling in the background, so I'm gonna just get to this episode. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jason Evert. Okay. All right. Well, hi, Jason. Welcome back to Steadfast. How are you doing?
No, thanks for having me back. Doing well.
Good. Are you having a busy summer with Steubenvilles and conferences?
We've got one Steubenville, then we have a wilderness backpacking retreat in Colorado, which is going to be fun, and then a World Youth Day in Portugal.
So not busy at all.
No, not at all. Nothing going on.
Well, before we dive into this topic of gender and identity, I first want to establish your credibility. So why should our listeners be like, wow, this is a credible source? Jason knows what he's talking about. Can you give us your background in this?
Well, for the past 25 years, I've traveled to 6 continents to speak to about more than 2 million young people on the topic of human sexuality. And especially in the last decade or so, especially the last 5 years, I've had so many young people approach me about their struggles with the subject. Parents coming up to me, what do I do? My daughter's identifying as non-binary, wants to get a binder. What do I do here? And so I started to think, okay, I need to write a book on this to give people a resource. I figured, okay, I'll read 10 or 15 books on the subject, combine that with my pastoral experience, should be good to go. Because I got a degree in mental health and human services in college and counseling. So should be good there. I studied philosophy, theology. So I got through the 15 books and I'm like, this hasn't even scratched the surface. I need to read 5 more on endocrinology, 5 more on pediatric medicine, 5 more on anthropology, 5 more on feminism and Marxism and this and that. And when it was all said and done, I'd gotten through more than 20,000 pages of research and felt like, okay, I finally feel like I'm starting to get a better understanding of this. Listen to literally hundreds of hours of interviews with people who had transitioned and were happy, people who had transitioned and were miserable, detransitioners, debates, left, right, just so that the church would be able to have the language to know how to speak into this topic with both clarity and charity. And so every week I'm in dialogue with people all over the spectrum on this issue, listening to where they're coming from, and just trying to equip parents and even people going through gender dysphoria to realize that the church does not hate them. The church loves them and wants to accompany them to discover the identity that God has blessed them with, even though that might be difficult to embrace.
That's amazing. And I applaud you for your commitment to this topic, because I did a few days of just research, and I felt so almost way out of my league or hopeless, where I was just like, this is just so sad, especially diving into the D-trans group on Reddit. It's just heartbreaking. I just don't know how you emotionally are so strong about this. So I'm sure that there's a lot of prayer.
I see the detransitioners as our hope. I mean, it's heartbreaking reading their stories, but they're the ones that are going to win this, not us.
Yeah. Oh, so true. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just basically lob up arguments to you that I have heard or received this week, especially after this Target news. And I'd like you just to respond to them. And I thought that I was so clever, because I was like, oh, we can just like have a back and forth. I can just give you all the arguments. But then I remember that you already did this in your book. So I will put your book in the show notes. What you do is you kind of go Aquinas style, and you present the opposing argument better than they really present it. So hats off to you, but then you respond in a very loving way. So here we are. What I'm going to do is go through like both logos, ethos, pathos, and a little bit of theos. I've got some of those questions and arguments, and then we have some listener questions.
Okay.
Fire away. Here we go. First, gender is a social construct, particularly influenced by Western civilization, but gender is fluid, and there is biological sex, and then there's gender. And so we should be able to choose your own gender.
Okay, well, I say step one, let's define gender here, because one of the challenges is that gender, in my opinion, is not a particularly helpful word. And I say that because it has so many different meanings to different people. And you could have two people debating on it for an hour and realize we're completely talking past each other. Now, historically, the word gender, its first origination in the English language was in the 13th century. And that was gender in reference to grammar, that noun is masculine, feminine, or neuter in its gender. That predominantly was the way in which the word was used throughout all of history. Eventually, it became synonymous with biological sex. But then in the 1950s, Dr. John Money introduced the phrase gender roles. And that's the time we'd first ever even seen this word in the medical literature. And within a few decades, it completely took over the medical literature as this sense of self that is not only distinct from biological sex, but that can be divorced altogether from biological sex. And so one of the challenges, a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, we had a gender reveal party. Okay, what do you mean? Did you reveal the inner sense of their sense of masculinity, femininity, non-binary, or neuter of your baby? No, we just revealed the biological sex of the baby. But we said it's a gender reveal. So you see how easy we could be talking past each other. One person thinking it means biological sex, the other thinks this. It's almost like a soul that the person has, distinct from the body, that even overrides biological reality. The challenge is if we detach our sense of identity from our bodies, then our identity needs to anchor onto something. But what is it going to anchor onto if it's not your body? It'll anchor onto your personality. But there are as many personalities as there are persons, and you will literally end up with an endless list of gender identities. Because what we need to realize is that body isn't something you have like you have a pair of jeans. No, your body is you. If you say, I'm going to the store, well, your body's going to the store, okay? Because you are your body. But what gender theory is proposing here is an absolute divorce from our gender identity, from our bodies. And it's speaking into a lived experience of individuals who it's not just that I like what girls like, or I feel like a girl. I feel I am a girl. It's this deep-seated lack of congruence between what you know your body is, but then this deeply felt experience you have. And when there is that feeling of incongruence, you have dysphoria, which is the opposite of euphoria. So a profound suffering that is real. I mean, it's in the DSM-5 as a mental disorder. And some people, I don't like that it stigmatizes this. Other people in the trans community, no, that's a good thing. That allows us to get, insurance to cover procedures. So there's infighting even in the trans community over this. But we need to realize this lived experience is true. But the problem with gender theory is it takes a deeply held feeling and concretizes it into my ontological identity. Not only do I feel this, my feeling is reality. And so my body doesn't reveal reality. Feelings reveal reality. The problem isn't in my mind. The problem is in my body. So the solution must be to surgically augment the body. Then I can be my authentic self. And so that's kind of a run through over kind of because I know it's mystifying territory. When we start talking about gender fluid, non-binary trans woman, our brains like start glitching like a video game. It's like, what does that mean? And so we've got to learn the language and listen to these individuals, not for the sake of just kind of patting them along. Okay, whatever you want to do, you do you. To really know where they're coming from and know where this distress might be coming from as well.
All right, let's talk about this biological sex then. So sex is not binary. We see variations of our chromosomes all the time, and there are actually 5 sexes.
Okay, yeah, this proposal was put forth by a woman named Anne Fausto Sterling, and she had this idea that there's this platonic ideal of biological male, biological female, and if there's any variation in that whatsoever, then you don't have a real male or real female. You have some intersex thing, and you start hearing these words, intersex. Oh, wow, it sounds like a person who's kind of half this and half that, just kind of a blend that's neither one or the other, and you hear these terms thrown out, well, Klinefelter's and Turner syndrome, and see, that's proof sex is not binary. Okay, well, let's look at these individuals. Let's not just throw out words. Let's study this. Okay, Klinefelter's. Well, this is when you have a biological male who doesn't just have XY chromosomes. They can have XXY chromosome or XXXXY chromosomes. You've got an additional X chromosome from one of the parents. And so typically what will happen for that man is that he will can sometimes have more breast tissue, often struggle with infertility. And some men, though, live their entire lives completely unaware that they have Klinefelter's. Some don't even discover they have it until they seek infertility treatment. And then the doctor is able to say, oh, well, look, this is why you're struggling with fertility. You got Klinefelter's. The other one similar to that would be Turner syndrome. This is something that impacts women where instead of having XX chromosomes, she can have a missing or partially deleted second X chromosomes in some or all of her cells. And this will cause her to be a little shorter in stature because a second X chromosome is needed for the ovaries to fully develop. She'll typically not fully go through puberty and be a little shorter in stature, have infertility issues, but she is a female. And so these are females that have a disorder of sexual development, but there's no clinical sense in which this is some intersex condition. This is a disorder of sexual development. It's as if my heart had 3 chambers instead of 4 chambers. It doesn't mean I'm anything less than human. It's just a disorder of the proper development. And so how do you know a person's sex? Well, an organism is sexed according to how that organism is organized for reproduction. And so there's only 2 mature reproductive cells, a sperm or an egg. That's it. Only 2 gonads. You got the ovaries, the testes. That's it. There's no third. There's no fourth. There's no halfway in between. It's one or the other. Now, you could have a disorder of sexual development in one or both of those organs. In an extreme case, you could have something, for example, called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Another one is called complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. Now, this second one to me is really interesting because you've got a person who's XY in their chromosomes. They have an active SRY gene, which is typically the real sign there's going to be a male pathway of development. But because their body can't respond to testosterone, they develop as female. And so they're born looking completely female. Then they hit puberty and they don't menstruate. So you go to the doctor and the doctor examines and realizes, oh, the reason your daughter's not menstruating is she doesn't have a uterus. She doesn't have ovaries. What she has are undescended testes that are starting would normally produce testosterone, but the body converts that into estrogen, so she fully develops as a female. And so once again, you have a female person who has a disorder of sexual development. And so what we need to understand is while it's true that everybody is male or female, it's not true that everybody's sex is unambiguous. And so sometimes when a baby is born with ambiguous genitalia, what's needed is a team of doctors that'll come in to assist the family. You might have a urologist, you might have a specialist in pediatric medicine, someone who studies the blood, the chromosomes, and together as a team, they'll pastorally kind of help the family. Look, I know the delivery day today wasn't quite what you're expecting, and you might be a little concerned and stressed out, but we're going to work together and kind of figure out what's going on here. And then they'll be able to look at, okay, is this a boy or is this girl? Do they have a lot of testosterone and it's causing the girl's clitoris to be more physically large, and that's a genital ambiguity, or what's going on over here? So there are disorders of sexual development, but it's false to say that there's more than two sexes. We are a sexually dimorphic species. There is no third.
In nature, we actually see, though, that these, sure, there might only be the two sexes, male and female, but we see fish, bugs, reptiles, we got bees and clownfish, and they can change genders. So if we see this in nature, then why can't it be natural for humans to also switch genders?
Well, one thing you'll notice in the phrasing of the question, change genders. Okay, well, what is gender? Is the gender the internal sense of the sexual identity of that fish? Or is it the biological reality of them? Like, let's stick with what our terms are here. And I think it's really interesting when you start talking about intersex conditions as proof for gender theory. It's like, well, wait a minute. Are you telling me that we should look to the body to reveal the identity of the person? Wait a minute. That's the opposite of what you claim. Like, pick a lane here. It's one or the other. Does the body reveal the person? Well, if so, you've uncut your entire argument from gender theory. But it is true. Within less than a fraction of 1% of the animal kingdom, you have what's called sequential hermaphroditism. And so you look at these. I mean, it's fascinating. And there's one called the goby fish, where if you take the largest, it's typically a bunch of females with one alpha male. Take the alpha male out, and the largest female within a week will transition into a biologically male fish. Then you reintroduce the male back into the habitat, and the largest female who had become male will transition back into female and be capable once again of reproducing with the male. This, as I said, sequential hermaphroditism is clear when it exists in species, but it does not exist in the Homo sapien. It does not exist. We do not have this capacity. We are fixed in our sexuality. Every single cell of the human body that has a nucleus is sexed. They found more than 6,500 sex-specific genes, meaning your arteries are male or female, your spleen is male or female, your esophagus, your heart, it's male or female, and it's fixed. So you could die 10,000 years from now. Paleontologists could exhume your remains, look at your hip structure, and say, Sammie, female, end of discussion. You could pluck one hair of your hair, send it to a forensic scientist, they look at it, female. It's fixed. And so you can't look at a different species and say, therefore, because they can change their sex, human beings can as well. But to be fair, most people who experience gender dysphoria are not making this argument. They're not saying, oh, I can change my sex. They know you can't change your sex. Right. What they're saying is, look, my sex is very unambiguously that sex, but I don't identify with that. And that's precisely the cause of the distress, is the realization that what your body is does not line up with the identity that you feel and you experience. And so it's real important. The vast majority of people who have disorders of sexual development do not identify as trans. And the vast majority of people who identify as trans do not have disorders of sexual development. These are completely different issues, and to conflate them together is to actually disprove gender theory itself.
This is a side note, but have you heard of this somewhat new book called Mad Honey?
No, I've not.
So basically, I'm like deep in this murder mystery. I'm a big fan of murder mysteries, and come to find out that the victim may have been murdered because we didn't know this until like 8 hours in. She's actually transgender. And so the whole time, though, the author is talking about bees and all about bees and how natural it is for them to change genders and everything. And like telling this story, like framing it around bees and just, the way that bees function and the queen bees and changing the worker bees, changing genders. And she's framed this whole story. And I was so upset. I stopped reading it. I was just like, I've been duped. I was so mad.
Well, the movie The Matrix is entirely an allegory of transgenderism. And this is not some like, red pill thing. Like, no, it is. I mean, the people who produced the movie very wanted to portray Neo, as this character who was transitioning, and all the forces that were opposing him and being his authentic self and living this new reality. And so for all the Matrix fans out there and Keanu Reeves fans, I'm like, what? No, don't ruin it.
Yeah, don't ruin it.
But yeah, the producers of the movie are very clear. That's why they wrote that movie. That's the whole underlying story behind the Matrix.
My husband's going to be so upset when I tell him.
Yeah, let's keep that on the down low.
Yeah, no. So I have a couple of reports from universities here. So according to a report done by UCLA School of Law, nearly 1 in 5 people who identify as transgender are between the ages of 13 and 17. And according to Stanford University School of Medicine, starting gender affirming hormone treatment in adolescence is linked to better mental health than waiting until adulthood. And we care about the mental health of these people. And most people that have transitioned knew from a very early age that they were meant to be another gender. Mm-hmm. So the argument is kids should have access to these hormone blockers, and we should be supporting them and supporting their mental health.
Yeah, well, a couple of things you need to look at is whenever you hear a study, you got to say, okay, what's the source? Let me see the paper. Let me actually read this thing. And what you want to look at are a couple of things. Is this a longitudinal study? If so, how long? Did they follow up a year after it? I mean, there's one trans advocate, Joanna L. Olson Kennedy, and she said, look, I followed these girls after their top surgery, and there was virtually a 0% regret rate. It's like, wow. How long did you follow up? 1 to 5 years. Okay, wait a minute. So you're telling me a girl who had a double mastectomy at 13 didn't regret it when she was 14? And that's airtight? Okay, how many people did not respond to your survey? 28%. Lost to follow-up. Okay, so if one of those girls committed suicide, how is she supposed to report back that she wasn't really pleased with the outcome of the surgery? This is why these studies you hear about, even the authors in the study, one of the biggest ones is a meta-analysis of 28 studies together, and it's always put out there. Oh, look, this is the gold standard showing, transitioning helps mental well-being. Read the study. The authors itself said this evidence is based on very low quality evidence. It's right there in the text. The reality is this is not an evidence-based approach. That's why Norway just announced a couple of weeks ago, no more. We're not doing it. No puberty blockers, no cross-sex hormones, no surgeries for minors. It's not happening. It is not evidence-based. Scandinavian countries, you got Sweden, you got Finland, same thing. You look at what's going on in Amsterdam and you over there, and you want to go get puberty blockers for your 13-year-old daughter who thinks she's non-binary. Good luck. You go to the clinics and they're like, okay, well, fill out the form here. Our waiting list is about a year and a half. Then we're going to take 9 months to deliberate if she's a suitable candidate for puberty blockers. And from the kid's perspective, it's like, what? By the time you guys make up your mind, my puberty is going to be over. Exactly. They're trying to buy some time because they realize there is not this massive body of evidence or any evidence showing that if you put the kids on this, they're going to do so much better afterwards. In fact, the studies show that when you put the girls on puberty blockers, they're more likely to self-harm after going on puberty blockers. But there's this narrative that, oh no, if it weren't for this, they'd be committing suicide. Like, really? Like, was there really this pandemic of trans suicides and then puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones became available? And then, shoo, the suicides rates dropped like a polio vaccine eradicated polio? No, the data shows the exact opposite, that the suicide rates are ascending after these treatments. In fact, the biggest study that was done over in Sweden, and they found about 10 years after the surgery, suicide rate climbs to 19 times higher than the general population. And the reason for that is not because all these transphobic bigots. The reason is because 90% of people who commit suicide have a diagnosable mental health disorder. That's why when they did an audit of the Tavistock Clinic of the patients, they just looked at 124 random patients that came in. 97.5 of them had comorbidities of a psychological nature: depression, autism, anxiety, trauma, divorce, so much stuff going on in their life. That's why 35 of their psychologists quit. They said, you're not letting us explore these deeper psychological issues. You're just diagnosing every kid who doesn't like their body as trans and then giving the treatment pathway of transitioning. Then they're going to be happy. Why do you think there's 47,000 detransitioners on Reddit right now screaming from the rooftops and starting and winning their lawsuits?
Yeah. All right. So fine. Maybe we won't let them take puberty blockers right away. Maybe we'll give them 2 years. But why not let kids explore their gender in a safe environment? There's nothing wrong with letting little boys wear sparkly skirts. They're just exploring. And don't we want to just let them explore that? And especially in like a safe environment?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I probably have photos of almost I got 6 boys and 2 girls, and I probably have a photo of at least a boy in every dress in the costume bin at some point of their development. Like, yeah, and they're robots and they're dinosaurs and they're this and they're that. And the girls are wearing camo and they've got swords. It's like, have at it. I'm not freaking out over this stuff, nor am I like, oh, well, that's maybe who you are. If you like to twirl around in that, then maybe that's your identity. I think we have to avoid both of these extremes, because when you have these overly rigid approaches, don't you dare put that on, boy. Whoa, what is it? Creates a mystery about it. And like, wait a minute. Well, I kind of felt this when I put that on, and now it's this forbidden fruit to me. So I think we could do great damage if you've got a young girl who's experiencing gender dysphoria. It's like, no, you will wear the pink dress. You will wear the frills, and you will be all decked out the way that I want to get you all decked out. That could exacerbate her feelings of dysphoria. And so we got to be careful there. And we've got to make sure we're not pigeonholing our kids into these overly rigid gender stereotypes that themselves are a cause of distress. Because if you're a real man, you better be into drinking beer and shooting deer and watching NASCAR. Okay, I like theater and poetry and the arts. Well, you're not a man like your dad is. Maybe I'm not a man. And so you can see how these overly rigid gender stereotypes are a problem. But gender theory is not the answer, because what stereotypes do is try to get a person to conform their personality to match the body. But then gender theory just tries to get a person to get their body to fit their personality. Neither one of these, to me, is the right approach.
Yeah. All right, we're going to an emotional argument here. So some people just feel differently in their heart and their soul, and they don't feel at home in their body. So are you going to deny them the chance of being able to feel at home with themselves?
Well, I think if the premise here is that if they just go through these surgeries, they're really going to feel at home in their own body. Then they're going to find like, oh, at last. But I mean, I can't even count how many stories and interviews I've seen of people who go through this transitioning process with this promise that at the end of that road is going to be that pot of gold, and then I'm finally going to get there. And then the anesthesia wears off and the surgical dressings are removed, and they look down on their body in absolute horror. Like, what did I do to myself? What did you adults let me do to myself? And now here I am, 25 years old. I've lost my breaths. I'll never be able to breastfeed a child. I've lost all erogenous sensation in my chest. And now all my friends are going to not only be breastfeeding their kids, they're going to be having kids. And now I can't. And so it seems like this bright idea that's just going to erase all the dysphoria. But the long term, I mean, the verdict is in. I mean, why do you think countries like the United Kingdom are shutting down the biggest gender clinic in their entire country that has more than 1,000 lawsuits pending against it right now? We out here in the West are just clueless. It's like we got this GPS that says, hey, a quarter mile ahead is a 52-car pile up with 27 casualties in black ice. What do? Well, cruise control. Like, no, not cruise control. Hit the brakes. And so the idea that like, oh, we're preventing these people from being their authentic self. It's this idea that, well, it's surgery or suicide. I mean, those are the only options. Yeah. I think they deserve better than both of these things. I think they deserve a faith community that loves them, a family that won't abandon them, counselors that can really treat the deeper underlying issues here. And I think if they were surrounded with this love and compassion, they might have more compassion with themselves. And I think if God could speak to them, he would say, like, my beloved child, like, you were not born into the wrong body. You were born into the wrong culture, a culture that's telling you you might have to hurt your body to be your authentic self. But look, if anyone tells you you have to hurt your body to be yourself, that's false compassion.
That was your mic drop moment. In my mind, I was like, so we use that for the preview of the episode. Okay. Yeah. So I got this argument from a former teen, and I have not heard this one before. If God does not conform to a gender, why should we? God transcends gender, and we are made in the image and likeness of God. So why can't we transcend gender or this biological sex?
Well, again, let's look at that word gender. What on earth do you mean by gender? If you mean by gender biological sex, well, then God does not transcend that, because he became man. He became flesh. He took on our humanity and became a sexually dimorphic person. And he still has his male body for all eternity in heaven. He rose from the dead. Look at my hands. Look at my feet. Look at the wounds. It's me. And so not only does he not have a gender, so to speak, he assumed one in the incarnation. And he also, through the Old Testament and the New, reveals God the Father, okay? And he, again and again in the sacred scriptures, referring to the nature of fatherhood. And it's not imposing our masculinity on God. It's us realizing what fatherhood is by keeping our eyes on the Father. He is the author of fatherhood, not me and my biology. My body, Pope John Paul II was giving a retreat to college guys once, and he said that we men should sing hymns of praise to God the Father for this reflection of himself, not only in our souls, but also in our bodies. And so we should, in our bodies, reflect the love of God the Father. And so to me, it's a very poor argument to look in the direction of the Blessed Trinity if you want to avoid acknowledging biological realities of sex, because God created that from the beginning, male and female, and then he assumed it in the incarnation. But then we also have to realize we're not talking ultimately about a human being in Jesus Christ. We're talking about a divine being that assumed human nature. And so whenever you're talking about a different type of being, different beings have different relations to human sexuality. I mean, a rock is a being, but it has no sex. So should we assume from that we don't have a sex or a gender? Well, no, because a rock is, a physical being, not a spiritual human being. And likewise with the angels. They're not sexed male or female because they don't have a body. And so should we assume, well, because angels don't have a gender, that we shouldn't have a gender either? Well, no, we're not angelic beings. We have a hylomorphic union of body and soul together. That's what a human being is. And so as much as all this, what is a woman and debating, and it seems like, why are we even going through this? It's because we need to go through this. We don't even know what it means to be human anymore. And so wrestling with these tough questions is an invitation to discover what does it even mean to be human? Because if we lose sight of supernatural realities, we're not even going to be able to see natural realities anymore, which is where we're at today.
Yeah. Let's talk about Target.
Yeah.
So why should we care?
Yeah.
Why should we care? I've had so many people, it's just like, well, then don't shop there. If you don't like it, don't shop there. And in my mind, I'm like, that's also what they say about abortion. Like, well, if you don't like it, then don't have one. And that's just not how we respond. But why should we care?
I would say, yeah, don't shop there. I think I've got on my phone here, if I got a second here, I go into the albums here. Let me see. I'm just going to pull this one up. I just went ahead and took a look at how things are going over at Target there. There you go. I'm going to see if we can zoom in on that one. That's the last 5 days of the value of the shares at Target falling through the floor because parents are like, what are you doing here? You're putting in the front of your store bathing suits, not only for adults, but for kids that allow little boys to tuck their genitals underneath them so it doesn't reveal their male identity. And you're just putting this front and center of the store. I'm out. Our family's out. I mean, we used to buy tons of Target stuff and they've been pushing it for years, but it's like, okay,
they leveled up.
Yeah. It's like, dude, really? After what you just saw with Bud Light, where they lost like $5 billion in revenue in a week after the Dylan Mulvaney thing, and now you're going to roll this thing out? Good luck with that. And so they're scrambling. They had an emergency conference with their managers of take the whole thing, put it in the back of the store. And they had this emergency 10 or 15 minute meeting with all the store leaders. Look, get it in the back of the stores. Just shove that thing back there. We are tanking. And what that tells me is that our culture is not on board with this whole thing at all. It really isn't. A lot of people just go along with it because it's either socially or financially expedient to do so. Because, well, I'll put my preferred pronoun in there because I don't want to lose my job. And I'm not going to speak up in my university classroom because then I'm going to be labeled a transphobic bigot. But when it comes to what we're swiping with our credit cards, whether it's Bud Light or Target, that speaks for itself. People are not on board with this whole issue. They're just afraid to speak up, but I think they'll let their money do the talking.
I think that the responses I've gotten is like, oh no, all those swimsuits were just for adults. I'm like, well, the ads have pictures of teenagers. And so you're still trying to expose our kids to this. And I think so many people are like, who cares? Just love them. In fact, the LGBT community is actually upset about all of this because they just want to be accepted. And then as far as the satanic thing, it seems like, Target just partnered with a Satanist who has a lot of this art of Satan respects your pronouns. And what I was told by somebody as a response was like, no, it's not like we're this community is satanic or Satanists. They're just trying to reclaim something because they have been told by the church that they are rejected. So this is kind of like a rebellion, like a tongue-in-cheek kind of situation where it's like, well, I'm reclaiming the narrative and Satan says it's okay and he respects me. So this is how they're attacking it.
Yeah.
And even though I haven't seen any satanic pins at Target, it's the artists that they used,
Yeah.
and they've been having this art. And I think that so many people have just been responding to the transgender part, not the satanic part. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but you have to address the satanic part too.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just like be okay with Target partnering with Satanists and like having this art.
Satan does not respect your pronouns. Satan hates your pronouns. Satan hates what God has created you as, and he will do anything possible to obscure the meaning of your body. He doesn't just want you in hell. He wants your body destroyed and mutilated, and that's what he wants, because the devil is not only the enemy of our souls. The devil is the enemy of human nature. And so what God has joined, he wants to rupture. God joins a man and a woman, he wants divorce. God joins body and soul, he wants death. But if God has joined our body with our identity, and the devil can just get in there and split that atom, what you have now is man doesn't really mean anything. And if man doesn't, neither does male or husband or father or priest or family. Everything now is imploded in a sense. And so to me, this is the end game of gender theory, not to have a multiplicity of gender identities. No, I mean, the end game is for gender to be meaningless. The end game is to erase the spousal meaning of our bodies, that in our masculinity and femininity, we already have ultimate diversity, a diversity that reveals complementarity, not competition, reveals that in my body, I have been created for another. I have been created, stamped into my body. I am made to be a gift of myself in life-giving love. There is a Trinitarian reflection in the reality of the human body. And so this nauseates Satan. And so he wants to do anything he can to obscure the meaning of our bodies, because it makes visible the invisible love of God. And so don't think that Lucifer is your BFF when it comes to your gender identity. He's the one who's the ultimate enemy of your true identity.
I don't think it's okay just to kind of shrug it off like, oh, it's just a marketing scheme, or it's just like we're just claiming it almost as our mascot. It's just like just to reclaim the narrative. Like, no, you have to, I guess the devil is doing his job then. I guess he's convinced you that he's not actually real, or he's not a threat. He's winning. Do you have any, do you have time for listener questions?
Sure. Yeah. Let's grab them.
Cool. Let's do it. So can you address the contagious nature of different identities and the trends among groups, especially of teens?
Yeah, a book that you'd want to read on that is Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, the transgender craze that's seducing our daughters. It's a fantastic read where she kind of popularizes the research done by Dr. Lisa Littman of this category called rapid onset gender dysphoria. And that's typically adolescent girls that did not have a pre-existing history of child dysphoria, all of a sudden at like 14, 15, 16 years old coming out, I'm non-binary, I'm trans, I want a top surgery, I want a binder, I'm changing my pronouns. And the parents are like, whoa, where the heck did this come from? And typically these girls are not dating somebody. They typically go to a public school or a more progressive school where there's 5 or 6 friends on campus who come out as trans or non-binary. They're spending an inordinate amount of time online on Tumblr, YouTube, Reddit, on all these forums, encountering these kind of trans influencers during a time of their own life where they're struggling with like, who am I? What is my identity? I never felt like I really fit in with these other perfect, pretty girls. And maybe it's because I am non-binary. That's my whole identity. And they dive down these rabbit holes online where these influencers basically saying, look, any distress in your life is because of the gender thing. That is that's the whole thing that makes it all sense. If you can just fix that, everything's going to finally fit into place. And so what's happened ever since basically Instagram came into existence is this massive skyrocketing by the thousands of percents of girls identifying as trans. And what's interesting is before social media, it was predominantly young boys and middle-aged men. And for the middle-aged men, it was more of a fetish than an identity issue. But what we saw is a massive inversion of the sex ratio and of the ages. So it was these adolescent girls. We don't have like 35-year-old moms coming out as like, oh, I'm non-binary. I finally found they're not there. It's predominantly these adolescent girls that are typically very susceptible to social contagion. Now, this doesn't explain everything. It's not a one-size-fit-all answer, but it's a real thing. And to ignore the reality of the social contagion piece is to completely have an ostrich kind of approach this. Like, oh, nope, that's not happening. Put the head in the sand. Oh, yeah. I mean, look at the numbers going in, flooding into these gender clinics. They can't handle the influx of these young girls. And it's not that these girls necessarily want to be a boy. They just know they don't want to be a girl. Abigail Schreier said they are fleeing womanhood like a house on fire. I mean, one girl emailed me yesterday and she said, well, why is it wrong to transition if I wanted to identify as a boy so I don't become an object of abuse from boys? And it's like, whoa, here we go. I mean, now you're seeing an ache of not wanting to be sexualized in an over pornified culture. A woman who's seeking to dissociate from her feminine identity as a defense mechanism from abuse. These are the deeper underlying stories that are not being read into when we simply slap the label trans on these kids. There's a lot more going on here. That's why there was a research done over in the Tavistock Clinic where there's a psychologist there. And he was treating patients who were considering transitioning and then treating patients who had already gone through the surgical procedure and were wrestling with that. And so he thought, well, what would happen if I brought the two groups together and kind of give them a chance to get to know each other and share their stories? When he did that, the younger population group that was considering transitioning, 98% of them said, no, thanks. We'll sort this thing out without your surgeries. Thanks so much. They desisted 98% of them. And all they needed to do was meet these detransitioners and realize like, wow, I have the same problems you had before your surgery. And now you still have those problems and you got some extras. Maybe there's another way around this.
So what advice do you have for parents who have teens hanging out and being influenced on social media or by these friends that claim to be transgender? What advice do you have for the parents?
Well, I mean, obviously you want to look at the social surroundings there. I know some parents that have not only had to move schools, but move cities for the sake of saving the kid. And they said it was the best thing we ever did. They're totally in a different environment where they have, I know of one story where this happened, where the parents didn't move cities, but schools for the girl. And in the previous school, she just felt like such the odd one out and she wanted a top surgery and all this stuff. Then they got to the new school and they said, look, okay, no more YouTube, no more Tumblr. We're going to have family dinners. We're going to go camping more often. So they spent more time in three-dimensional space than living in this world where anyone can be anything, and just more three-dimensional interaction as a family. She ended up at this new school and found a whole new set of friends that were more tomboyish, didn't kind of fit the perfect feminine mold, but were at home in their own bodies. And her dysphoria desisted. And this is what happens about 80 to 95% of the time in childhood gender dysphoria. It desists as long as puberty can take its natural progression. And they're not put on these puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones that sterilizes the kids for the rest of their life. That's not the answer. And so I would say parents, try to buy yourself some time, get them as much as you can off the social media, away from these influences. If you go to our website, chastity.com/gender, go to that and just scroll down. We've got all these links of family advocacy groups, legal groups that can support you if there's a risk of CPS coming and taking your kid away from you because you won't let the 15-year-old girl cut her breasts off. Like you might need legal support, pastoral support. And you also want to dive in, like, what is non-binary mean? What does my daughter mean when she's a demi boy? Like, what does this stuff mean? Dive in. And listen to your kid instead of being like, well, this is just a phase and you're crazy. Wow, thank you for sharing with me that you're wrestling with this. I'm sure that was probably really hard for you to tell me because you might be afraid that I'd be mad at you and shun you. But like, this obviously is causing you a lot of stress. Tell me more about that. Let's go have coffee. Like, oh, mom's safe to go to. Oh, dad's safe to go to. They're not going to freak out on me and scream at me. They're going to walk with me through this. I know one girl went through this process and then detransitioned and said, you know what? I'm really glad now that my mom doesn't rub my nose in that, because she's now looking back. I'm really embarrassed that I thought that I was non-binary. Now I'm 22 years old and I realized what was going on. But as a 15-year-old, I didn't have the cognitive capacity to realize that there's no such thing as that. But now my mom doesn't rub my nose in it. And we've got a really good relationship. And so we've got to be patient. And the book that we came out with called Male, Female, Other, which is at chastity.com, also has a big chapter just for the parents on strategies of what to do and also what to avoid that could further alienate your kid, and how to kind of hold on to their hand and hold on to reality at the same hand.
Does that include any tips for navigating all the information online?
Yeah.
Cool.
It does. So chastity.com/gender has tons of links on there from anything from counseling to, or if you want to learn the side effects of the hormonal and medical interventions that are going on, get researching on that stuff. Because a lot of the stuff is just totally swept under the rug when it comes to transitioning the kids. Like, oh no, it's going to be okay. If you don't like your breasts or the lack thereof, you can just get new ones later on. It's like, nah, it doesn't quite work like that. Let's listen to the stories of people that have gone through this, because when you do, it's really eye-opening, especially for the kids thinking that these procedures are going to put everything in place, and then it's over and they just want another one and another one and another one. It's like this endless set of false summits. A guy I know, Walt Heyer, went through the whole transitioning, lived as a woman for years, and then detransitioned, found a good psychologist. And the psychologist said, you have dissociative disorder, and kind of explained what that meant, and everything fell into place. And now he looks back at the transition. He said, look, it was a wonderful distraction for a while, but it never addressed the core issues.
And one of the arguments in your book that you made that blew my mind was with the anorexic girl.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If a girl is standing in front of you, anorexic, and she doesn't like her body and is fighting with this, you don't just give her diet pills and support her in this.
Yeah.
We want to help her and figure out that core issue, like you're saying.
Because you could give a girl diet pills and even liposuction and then survey her afterwards. Are you happier with your body now that we gave you a liposuction and diet pills? Most of the girls would probably say, yeah. Oh, well, then good. That's the best standard of care for anorexic girls because they were happier after the surgery. They deserve better than that. They deserve to realize that you don't have to hurt your body. Maybe the problem isn't in your body. You're 85 pounds. Your hands are cold. Why are they cold? Because the blood is retreating to your vital organs to keep you alive. Like there's something deeper going on here. Why maybe you're spending so much time on social media and these filtered pictures of all your classmates' perfect bikini bodies, and you look at the mirror and you're disgusted. Like maybe the answer isn't the drugs and the knives. You know, maybe the answer is to heal your understanding of womanhood. That takes a lot more work. But I think we've got to be courageous in showing people maybe who be gender dysphoric or experiencing body dysphoria in other ways that there are answers besides suicide and surgery.
Yeah. And happiness aside, there's something to be said for being healthy too.
Yep.
So this came from a wonderful seminarian. How do we speak truth in charity versus sharp truth?
Well, I think by starting by listening. Tell me more about this. When did you start feeling that way? Like taking an authentic interest in this person as opposed to like, what's that perfect apologetic argument I can pull out of my holster, blow away gender theory with? Because people who wrestle with this genuinely aren't looking for somebody that has all the answers. I think they're looking for someone to walk with in their life to discover the truth. And so we've got to make sure that we're not taking this pompous ground of like, I got all the answers, and if I can just give you enough good arguments, then you're going to desist from this. Sometimes you can have all the great arguments in the world. You can even take a deep dive psychologically to where these roots are coming from, but it's no guarantee that the dysphoria is just going to disappear. But your holiness is not measured by how dysphoric you feel about your body. It's not like if you just pray enough rosaries, it's all going to go away. Sometimes it may, God does miracles, and sometimes it persists for years. I mean, I'm in daily dialogue with a married man who wrestles with gender dysphoria. His kids don't know that he wrestles with it. His wife knows to an extent, but his parish community has no idea. He's a macho looking guy and military dude and all that, but he's been wrestling mightily with this for years. But that's not a sign that his identity is trans. It's a sign that he does have something called gender dysphoria. And so he needs compassion, and he needs love, and he needs respect. And well, are you suppressing his ability to be his authentic self? I think he's being his authentic self. He's being a manly man about this, of just like, look, I'm not going to expose my kids to the suffering that they would go through because I have to just express myself and wear a dress to church on Sunday. He's actually putting his kids before him. He's putting his wife before him. I mean, this is authentic masculinity, although he's wrestling to believe he is that masculine. I really believe he is. And so these individuals need to not hear Catholics mocking this and dismissing and all this non-binary, gender fluid, trans woman nonsense, you bunch of woke snowflakes, idiot mental health. Like they hear that being our attitude. It's like, goodbye. Like, why would I expose my vulnerabilities to you knowing that you just think I'm a joke of a human being? Like, no, they need to hear because they're around us. You don't even realize it. Like they're there. And it's not an us or them type of thing. All of us in one way or another wrestle with what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And so just be Christ to these people. They don't have leprosy, welcome them into the faith and walk with them in love.
Last question. How do we shine God's light and God's truth through this darkness? We talked about it a little bit earlier, even just with me researching that. I think it was partially the spiritual attack, where I just felt so hopeless and just like, it's just so dark. And also just felt like, how are we supposed to actually help people or change people's minds about this? How can we make a difference? So how do we shine God's light?
One, through intercession, by praying for these families and praying for these individuals. Two, by the way that we talk, that it's respectful of this issue and compassionate. Also, if you encounter somebody who wrestles with this, I know one Protestant pastor, he said, look, I feel like I'm meeting you in chapter 8 of your life, but I haven't had the chance to learn about chapters 1 through 7, but I'd really like to. And so welcoming them into your family, into your life, and getting to know them better. And then also research this thing, learn it, understand what this means. Don't say, well, that's not my issue. Well, soon it's going to be, whether it's going to be your cousin or your nephew who wants to be your niece, like it's going to come, it's knocking on the door. Go learn this. And it's not for the sake of agreeing with it all. I mean, if you fall in love with someone who speaks a different language, you probably want to learn the language just so you can have that deeper connection. It doesn't have to be your first language, but you could learn it and you'll have a greater connection. And so, yeah, although these terms can be mystifying, I saw one group forum on Facebook in the transgender community where they're talking about how they lost loved ones over the last year or so through suicide, murder, and they were all just kind of sharing their difficult stories. But then the mood kind of lightened for a while. And then one of the participants was like, hey, I don't know about you guys, but he said all these new words, the non-binary, gender fluid, two-spirit, he's like, I don't even know what this stuff means. And I'm embarrassed to say it because I'm trans. And then they all started laughing and they're like, I don't know what it means either. And they had this big hoot and holler laugh. I was like, okay, maybe you got something in common here. Maybe we're all kind of wrestling to keep up with these endless acronyms and genders. Like, it's difficult. But like Vatican II said, if God is forgotten, the creature itself becomes unintelligible. We need to, again, relearn who God is, and then we'll discover who we are.
Beautifully said. Hey, thank you for spending time and diving through all this. You did. I mean, I love your book. I'm just very impressed and very grateful that you've devoted so much time and energy into this particular facet of that just so desperately needs to be, talked about in today's culture.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just I'm trying to set the pastoral tone in the sense for the church of, it's not like you either accept them or you're abandoning them. What does accompaniment look like? What does it mean to understand where they're coming from without necessarily endorsing this, and holding that tension in place? It feels like we're walking the top of a really sharp ridge. It's like, well, if I take one step this way, then it's kind of really entering into this delusion. But then if I go this way too far, they're going to feel like I just hate them. So how do I kind of hold fast to the truths of the faith with love? And so that's the key. Charity and clarity together is what's needed now more than anything. And for people just to live out their own vocations. And so the best response you can do, be a holy wife, be a holy mother. I mean, the family is so under attack right now because it's the weapon. It's kind of like the Top Gun movie that came out last summer or whatever. The whole target was the weapon. That's what the whole movie was about, is attacking the weapon. That's why the devil is so hell-bent on attacking the family, because it is the weapon.
Yeah. I think that, especially as I'm talking about all pro-life topics, at the end of the day, it's just like the main thing I just keep thinking is like, we just need to tell people you are not alone and you are loved. Yep. And at the end of the day, that's where all these topics come down to, is just that's what the message that we should be spreading to all these people is, you're not alone, and we love you, and you are loved by your creator. And
and that at the end of the day, as alone as they still feel, even if they have this Spectrum Alliance club on campus and trans advocacy support on their social media forums or whatever, at the end of the day, we all experience aloneness. And God alone knows what you're going through. He alone sees the tears that fell on that pillow in the middle of the night when no one else is around. He's the only one who's with you in the aloneness. And so don't think that he's forsaken you because this is a tough road, that he's with you in the struggle. He loves you. He won't abandon you. And he doesn't look at you as some walking abomination to God, this constant failure of displeasure. So many people think that that's really how God sees me constantly. I'm just perpetually sinning. Gender dysphoria is not a sin. Okay. To have this mental health struggle is not a sin. God loves you, and he's calling you not only to pray more, calling you to sainthood, that it is possible to be able to wrestle with this and God do amazing things in your life.
Amen. Well, hey, have fun with all your adventures this summer.
Well, thanks so much. And likewise with you, and keep up the wonderful work here on the show.
Thank you.